Hello there. Welcome once again to our Bible Fellowship video series here on our YouTube channel at Chehalis Hills Baptist Church as we continue our way through our series, The Essentials of Christianity. I hope you've been enjoying this as we work our way through, and we've obviously built up through Easter. Went last Sunday looking at the work of the Holy Spirit, and now we're looking at kind of that final aspect of this series dealing with the essentials of Christianity that focuses on the return of Jesus. And we know that everything that we've talked about up to this point is building to the end of time as we know it. And so that's really one of the key foundational aspects of Christianity. What is that? How is this all going to come to an end? And so we really want to look at this idea that Jesus will return to establish his eternal kingdom. Now, as we've said with a lot of the lessons we've been going through recently, this is not meant to be an exhaustive study of eschatology or the study of end times, but it does give us some overviews. This particular lesson taken out of Matthew's Gospel, and it speaks about some of these elements of the return as we anticipate or as we wait and look forward to that time when Jesus returns. And so we've kind of finished with the death, burial, and resurrection. We know that Jesus rose from the dead. We know that he ascended to reside at the right-hand side of God in heaven, and waiting for that time when he will come and rapture his church and then establish his kingdom. And so we're talking about that time frame still in this New Testament church age or era. This time period between Jesus' ascension and his return, the time where people, Christians during that time, have been anticipating or awaiting this return of Christ and eventual establishment of the kingdom. And so this was a question that is certainly on our hearts, or should be, but it was on the hearts of the early believers as well. In fact, most of the early believers, if you read what some of the early writings of the church and even in some of the scriptures, there seemed to be this understanding that yes, Jesus died and he rose from the dead, and that was a great victorious thing. Then they saw him ascend into heaven, and very normal and natural to think, well, he's going to return very soon. And now here we are 2,000 years later, and it seems like every generation has sort of looked at the world around them and said, well, surely the return of Jesus is right around the corner. Surely this can't go on much longer. And so we find ourselves sometimes now, again, 2,000 years down the road, thinking, well, surely this can't go on much longer. So we really don't know when this is going to come to fruition. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit today. Not so much living in the spirit of question and doubt, but a spirit of calm assurance that the promises that Jesus gave us will come to pass and come to fruition. And so let's begin with Matthew 24, verses 3 through 8. We're going to look at three different passages out of that particular gospel. And so let's just start with verse 3 and see what Matthew said. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Remember, I kind of mentioned already that age, that era that we're in, when everything before Christ had taken place, and the Old Testament historical narratives of 400 years of silence. Then Jesus came, did his 33 years of life, and 30 years of life plus 3 additional years of ministry, and then his death, burial, resurrection. So from that point, we're in this age, this certain era, this New Testament age is what I like to call it. We just don't know the length of time on that. And again, from the very beginning, the disciples are saying, before Jesus even left, what are some signs? How will we know when this is coming to an end? Can you imagine them trying to think 2,000 years that we would still be asking those questions? They didn't think in those terms. They were asking about things they could look for themselves. So Jesus replied to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will deceive many. You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet." Jesus was saying, it's not right here. There are things that are going to take place. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginning of labor pains. And so that first introductory passage that we get when the disciples are asking these particular questions, here's what they're asking. When will this happen, and what are the signs? How will we know that it's right around the corner? And again, in their limited time frame, probably thinking, oh, within a month or a year or 5 years, or this is bound to happen soon. So what can we be looking for? And so when Jesus talks about this, there's a couple of things that he does. First of all, he doesn't answer the question. He doesn't say, oh, it's going to be 5 years, or it's going to be 2,300 years, or it's going to be a million years. He doesn't give an answer to that question. So I would say to you this: anybody that tells you they know when these end times events are going to be ushered into place simply does not know. Now, there are some educated theologians and scholars who have attempted to make some guesses based on information available to us, but we simply don't have enough information to actually predict when these events will take place. We don't know when the rapture will take place. We don't know when Jesus will establish his kingdom. And so we need to, let's just get that out of the way right at the beginning. We don't know when this is going to happen. If Jesus wanted his disciples to know, and by extension us who are part of this age, asking this question, when is this age going to come to an end? If Jesus wanted us to know, he would have answered this question right then. He would have said, yes, in the year 2073 is when all of this will take place. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to give them a specific answer. So the corresponding question is, as we are waiting for this to happen, are there some signs, are there some hints, are there some clues that we can be looking for as we eagerly wait? And so Jesus answered that one a little more directly, but he talked about and I don't want you to think of this as some specific things. Sometimes people get caught up in this and they say, well, we've had more wars recently than we've had in recent years. Well, that's not always accurate, because there have been times when the whole world has been in upheaval, and there's been times of peace. And so we don't just see this graph where we went from peaceful times to gradually more and more we see wars break out. No, it's kind of been up and down. And if you look at our world right now, there's all kinds of countries that are experiencing civil unrest and political upheaval and that sort of thing. But in this century alone, we've had 2 world wars that involved practically every nation on the planet. And we're not in that kind of time now. And so when he talks about earthquakes and things like that, people try to say, well, there's more earthquakes now than we ever knew before. Well, that's not accurate either, because earthquakes have always been a thing. Or there have been some horrific and damaging earthquakes that have taken place around the world 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago. Some of the things that we get when people try to mix this information with technology, for example, I grew up in Southern California. We have dozens and dozens of earthquakes every day in Southern California. But you would never know most of them are happening because they're so slight, or it's just a little shake that you might not even notice, or you're driving in your car and you don't even feel it. But we have technology now, these seismographs, that actually monitor the shaking and the motion. And if you look, you can look this up every day. You can find reports and say there were these many earthquakes, where they were located, what the magnitude was on a Richter scale. Most of those we don't even know about. And so, so my point to that is, because technology has allowed us to know more about these earthquakes, we then say earthquakes are happening more often. Well, that's not necessarily true. Earthquakes are going on all the time, but because our methods of measuring them and our knowledge about them has increased, we translate that into what the scriptures say, and Jesus said there would be more earthquakes. So my whole point of that discussion is just to caution us when we look at some of these individual signs. I believe in a general standpoint, Jesus was saying things are going to get worse before they get better. So our danger comes when we start pinpointing types of events or certain events or numbers of events, and we say, well, I've added it here, now there's more in here than there were 10 years ago, so surely that must be a sign. but that gets us into hot water. And again, it puts us into the act of trying to determine when Jesus never did give the answer to start with. And I want to talk about that too, just a little bit. When we talk about the when, I believe there's a good reason, probably multiple reasons, why Jesus would not want to share with his disciples when the end would come. And maybe I should talk about that when we get to the next one. So let me just hold off on that, because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But the question about when, accompanied by the idea of what signs, is really just the indication for us to understand that Jesus said, because of sin, because of the condition of man, this world is going to deteriorate. Morality will decline, peace will decline, wars will decline, famine and pestilence and so forth. All of that will increase. Again, not that we're counting famines, but that we're understanding that this world is going to be in a continual slide, and that ultimately Jesus will come to redeem and correct all of that when the events of end times begin to get ushered into place. But it does tell us that we should be consistently on the lookout, at least as far as our understanding. We should know, not so much taking the signs and saying how many signs and what do they all mean, but taking the existence of some of these signs as verification that what Jesus said was true. He said it was going to get bad. And look at the world around us. Even though we may not be technically as bad as we were in World War I or World War II right now, there's still wars. There's still hundreds of thousands of people that are in conflict all around us. The world is in a continual state of decline and decay and falling to sin because of the environment that we're in. So when we look around at the bad things and the signs, that should simply verify that what Jesus said was true. He said, this is how life is going to be. And it also could be that way for us as believers. It just gets more and more difficult for us as believers until the time when Jesus will come and make all things new and make all things right. So let's not get so caught up on the when, and let's make sure we're understanding even the signs that are coming, because again, there are a lot of people changed their thinking about end times theology, again, at the first half of this century, because they saw those horrific world wars and they thought, surely we can't get any worse than this. And yet here we are 50, 60, some 70 years later, and not in as drastic a period of worldwide conflict as we were then. So we need to be careful, but understanding that all of these things are reminding us that Jesus said, yes, it is going to be tough sledding until I come and redeem things. So the second thing we look at is in Matthew 24 up through verses 29 and 32, and it says this: immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Speaking about the gathering of his people being the rapture. Verse 32 says, learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. And so, again, while Jesus is saying, don't chase after these rumors and these signs and get yourself bogged into all that kind of stuff, here's what Jesus was saying about his return. And this speaking specifically to the rapture, when this age that we spoke about comes to an end and things begin to operate differently. We understand this, that the return of Jesus is imminent. Imminent simply means that it is coming, and then it could happen anytime. These events that we read about in Matthew 24, 29 through 32 are events that could happen while I am actually recording this video. They could happen between the time I record this and the time that you watch it, or they could happen before we gather for worship again next Sunday. They could happen 5 years from now, 40 years from now, 500 years from now. The time frame doesn't matter. What does matter when we talk about the imminence of this return, the rapture of the church, we talk about the fact that nothing really needs to happen for that to take place, and that, again, it's not the time frame, it's the assurance that it will happen. It is coming. These events that we read about as prophesied in Matthew's gospel and other places, these events are certain and are sure. I mentioned this to my Bible fellowship class last Sunday, and we talked about because there's been such a long, in our minds, a long stretch of time since the events, since these words were written and spoken by Jesus, that we sometimes fall into this maybe a level of comfort's not the term I'm looking for, but maybe this routine or this idea that, well, it's been 2,000 years. Who knows? It could be another 5,000 years. We begin to get a little bit lackadaisical, maybe a little bit content with our understanding. We don't maybe look at these things with the same level of urgency that the disciples were coming to Jesus with. When will this happen, and what are the signs? And again, we fall into the pattern of living, just the normal pattern of life, and we maybe don't look ahead with the same degree of anticipation. We just get comfortable in life as we know it. And again, part of that has to do with our thinking on how long this age should be lasting. But we talk about the fact that the return of Christ is imminent. We understand that it is coming, that it is sure and certain, and that the time frame between now and whenever it happens is irrelevant. It will take place. Again, it could happen in the next 30 seconds or the next 3,000 years. You and I don't know. Jesus didn't intend for us to know. But we do know that things will obviously continue to get worse before they get any better. And so he said, don't chase after all these things. The second thing is that we're not going to miss it. So please don't think for a moment that you're going to miss the rapture, the events. And you can just see what happened in these things, that the Son of Man will appear in the sky. All of the peoples of the earth will mourn. Now that probably refers to the fact that the decision to accept Christ will be made very real at that moment. And there will be many, many people. The scriptures tell us that the way to heaven and to salvation is a narrow path, and the vast majority won't be on that path. They'll just rejected the message of Christ, and there will be a great time of mourning when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and glory, the angels being sent out from a trumpet. All of these people will be gathered up. There is no way we're going to miss this event. You're not going to look around, and even the fact that people are missing. I noticed the Left Behind series, that the series of movies that were made years ago with Kirk Cameron. It's a wonderful series, and it's very entertaining and helpful to look at. But one of the things about that is the opening part of the Left Behind movie. The first movie takes place, I believe, on an airplane, and there's people off the airplane that disappear, and it's very hard to explain. They get other reports of planes crashing and that sort of thing. But what we don't see in that particular accounting of these events is this magnificent event, this worldwide event that everyone is going to know. Everyone is going to witness simultaneously. Trust me, when the angels come from heaven, when Jesus appears on the clouds, there's not a person that will miss it. We will know exactly what is going on. And so Jesus refers to himself here as the Son of Man, which he used that to talk specifically to the Jewish mindset. So it's no coincidence that Matthew uses it in his particular approach to the gospel, but it refers to, again, to this reference of the Messiah or the Christ. And we see that in Daniel 7, 13 to 14. The prophecy said, I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly one, like a son of man, was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. It talks about this prophetic account that Daniel is writing that speaks about the same thing, the term of the Son of Man. This is the Messiah, the one true Messiah. Even though Jesus had said others will claim to be messiahs, others will claim to, they will deceive you with falsehoods, but there will be no mistaking the return of Christ when this takes place. And so we'll know it is the Messiah. And he talks, of course, about the fig tree. He gives that example that even when you look at a fig tree, would have been normal in this area. You could use any plant, but he said when you notice, seasonally speaking, when the leaves fall off, and then you notice the blooms and the buds begin to appear. It's what we're seeing in our trees around us. Then we know that summer's coming. Now we actually can determine. We've said this is the date that summer starts. We kind of do that based on what we know scientifically in the solar system and so forth. But that whole idea of summer actually coming and approaching, that season coming, what he's saying in the fig tree is that these things will happen. Now, every fig tree is going to be different. They're not going to bloom at the exact same time. It doesn't all happen like clockwork, but it's this overall picture that these events will be taking place, and we can see these things coming as we look at the world around us. But there's no doubt when summer starts, we know that it is summer. We know that the trees are full of leaves and then ultimately full of fruit. And we know that we're in that season. And in the same way, we're going to be completely assured that the rapture has taken place and that Jesus has come again. And so the third thing we'll look at, skip up to verses 42 to 44, it's this really kind of more the practical aspect of this. He says in verse 42, therefore be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Remember, we tied that back to the fact that he didn't tell us when. It's the idea of being alert. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not had let his house be broken into. This is why you are also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And so that's what I wanted to, before I got ahead of myself, kind of talking about this idea that I believe one of the reasons that Jesus didn't tell us when he was coming was just what he stresses right here, that if we had known the date and time, let me ask you this, how would you and I, how would mankind, how would we have conducted our affairs or lived our lives? And it's and knowing human nature like I do, knowing my own nature like I do, let's just pretend that it would be in 2025, kind of a round number. We know that 2025 is when the rapture is going to take place. So I can pretty much guarantee you, the vast majority of people would go about their daily lives doing whatever they wanted until that time in 2025, and then they would say, I've done everything I want to do for myself, but now I need to get serious because it's about to come to a conclusion. If you're honest with yourself, you'd probably do that too. Hopefully not, and hopefully I wouldn't, but just knowing our nature, that's kind of how we would live. If you think about that also in terms of your individual lifespan, if somehow you were to know the exact moment of your death, you might very well choose to do that same thing. You could live any way you want to. You could take foolish risks because you know that your death wasn't coming. You could choose to live for your own pursuits and your own desires, but an hour before that clock were to strike and the death knell would ring with your name on it, then you would fall down on your face and say, God, forgive me of everything I've done. I am yours completely. Maybe not every person would do that, but we know human nature, don't we? That's kind of how we're wired. We're just inherently, because of that sin nature, we just often want to live for ourselves. And so we don't know the hour and the time that will happen. So the message for us is be alert. Be alert. That means not that we're just watching all the time for the signs, but that we approach the way we live with an understanding that at any time, all of this could stop. These events that Jesus is talking about and hinting about here, these events will be ushered in at this time of the rapture, this gathering that we just read about, and that will be it. We'll move into sort of a different phase or era of the way that God is dealing with humanity and with mankind. And so our readiness, really, us being alert has to do with being prepared and living our lives in such a manner that it could happen at any time. And this is kind of what I was getting to with my Bible fellowship class this week, that the way we live has to be one of anticipation, not of just comfortably assuming that, well, this isn't going to happen for a long time. It hasn't happened after this amount of time. It's bound to be a whole long time. But part of being alert is really coming to understand that these were promises given by Jesus. These are prophetic words that are recorded in the divinely inspired Word of God. And he promised us that he will come. He promised us that it will come to an end. And again, looking at this story about our own comparison with our own lives, you can even see the signs in your own lives. As you get older, you understand, well, I've matured, or now I'm getting gray hair, or now I'm slowing down, or we see signs, but we don't know when life is going to come to an end. So we live our lives not in fear and dread, and not constantly looking for gray hairs, but just saying, well, I don't know the time I've got left, so let me redeem what I do have. And I might have a day, I might get run over by a bus today, or I might be on this earth another 40 years. In my case, I don't know, and neither do you. How much would our lives be different if Jesus had said, Chuck, your life is going to end at 65, or Howard, your life is going to end at 19, or whatever the case may be. We would live our lives completely differently. And so Jesus is fully aware of what he's doing when he says, I'm not going to tell you the when, and when I list these specific signs, it's not that you're counting earthquakes or wars, but that you are understanding that my promises are sure, that the end will come, and that you need to live your life as though this could happen at any time. So being alert does not mean living in fear. Being alert does not mean, well, maybe we shouldn't have kids because it's a rotten, terrible world, and that's not what being alert means. Being alert doesn't mean standing outside and looking up in the heavens and looking for Jesus on the cloud. You don't have to look and stare. When it happens, you will know it. I will know it. And if it happens after you and I leave this earth, whoever's on the earth at that time, they will know it. You and I won't have to worry about it because we'll already be in his presence if we're believers. And so we don't have to be scanning the skies and hoping that we're going to maybe miss some, or fearful that we're going to miss something. We will know. The world will know when these events take place. Alert for us means to make sure that our hearts are in the right place, our spiritual standing with God is in the right place, that we're busy doing the things that he wanted us to do. Can you imagine how useless you and I would be if we just stood on a mountain and looked up the skies and said, okay, is it coming? Is it coming? While the world around us doesn't get the message that we've received? That's not what God called us to do. So as we look at this idea of Jesus coming and establishing his kingdom, there's work for you and I to do in this age, just like there's work for you and I to do in our own individual lives. Keep living, keep serving, understand that the end will come, even though we don't know when it will be, and let those signs and let the conditions of the world around us reinforce the promises that Jesus gave when he said, this will happen and things are going to get tough, but I guarantee you, I promise, I will come and gather those who are mine to myself. And the final thing I will say is that whenever that moment does come, it will be an absolute perfect timing. God knows everything. He understands what's going to happen, when that time frame will be done, and it will be done in absolute perfection. So maybe it'll be in the next 20 minutes. I don't know. Maybe it will still be another 2,000 years. I don't know, but I don't need to know. I need to know what my responsibility is, and I need to know that these promises are sure. And so when we think about that, it really does should impact the way that we live our lives. Never complacent, never just being too comfortable, but always being alert, being diligent, being faithful as we serve the Lord, and resting in that assurance, that promise that he will return in his perfect time and redeem all things and make them new and start that process. So I hope the series has, again, been an encouragement to you. We'll continue, we'll move forward starting next Sunday on an important series about really focusing on evangelism and sharing our faith. And that ties in perfectly with what we've just been talking about. How do we live as alert people? How do we live as people who believe and understand that the return of Christ could happen at any time? We don't know the when, so we ought to be sharing with people that there is a message of hope, even though they may not understand that. And so it'll be a nice transition to a few weeks studying this idea of evangelism and sharing our faith. So I hope you tune in on that. I hope you're coming to Bible Fellowship in person when you can. Almost all of our classes are meeting back on campus in some form or format, some including a Zoom option. And so I hope that your class has been getting connected with that. And if not, again, stay tuned to the YouTube channels and keep up on the lessons that way. And as I always say, contact me at the church office and let me know if I can help you get connected somewhere. So if you really do prefer to be studying the Bible together in a group. And so hope you've been having a great week. Look forward to seeing you again this Sunday as we gather in Bible fellowship and to worship the Lord. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful week. God bless.